The graduation hall buzzed with life. A sea of proud faces, waving hands and restless cameras. Bright lights reflected off polished floors, and the air crackled with the anticipation of names soon to be called. Thomas Wilson stood at the edge of it all, a worn figure in a world that no longer seemed to notice him. His jacket, once crisp, now hung a little loose on his frame. The modest medals pinned to his chest caught the light with a dull glint. His cane tapped lightly against the floor as he adjusted his stance, feeling the old ache in his knee stir beneath the polished surface of his shoes. He shifted forward, careful, deliberate. A man brushed past him, hurried, impatient. Brad Peterson, tie crooked, coffee trembling in one hand, deep lines carved into his face. The dark circles under his eyes made him look older than he was, worn thin by a life that showed in every scowl and muttered complaint. "Stay close, Lara. I don't have time to chase you through this crowd," he snapped at the girl following behind him, not looking back. She said nothing, just tightened her grip on a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes lingering quietly on the old man. Brad muttered again under his breath, not words for public hearing, and shouldered past Tom without a glance. "Out of the way, old man." Sharp, impatient, dismissive. Tom stumbled, the jolt sharp and jarring. His cane skidded slightly. Pain flared, a sharp, biting reminder in his knee. But he righted himself before he fell, the tremor passing unnoticed by the sea of celebration around him. No apologies, no glances back. Just the hum of voices, the flash of cameras, and the ache of being unseen. Tom steadied himself, pressing the cane firmly against the floor, his hand tightening just slightly over the worn wood. He lifted his gaze toward the stage, searching, not for pity, not for recognition, for Jacob, the boy he had raised like his own. But not everyone had forgotten. The hall was packed, rows upon rows of folding chairs stretching toward a raised platform draped in school colors. Banners hung overhead, stirring in the occasional sweep of air conditioning. The smell of fresh flowers and floor polish mixed uneasily with the faint whiff of coffee and tension. Parents jostled for space, craning for a better view of the empty stage, their excitement buzzing beneath the surface of polite whispers. Tom Wilson edged closer to the wall, positioning himself where he could lean lightly without appearing weak. He adjusted his jacket, the same one he'd worn to Jacob's high school graduation. Its seams now a little looser, its color a little more faded. Pinned to his chest was a modest array of medals, not the kind that turned heads, but the kind that meant something to those who understood the price. His fingers brushed over them, a habit more of memory than vanity. Across the room, Brad Peterson shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at his watch with a sharp, impatient sigh. His tie hung limply against his wrinkled shirt, and the seventh cup of coffee in his hand trembled ever so slightly as he tapped his foot. He wasn't looking at the stage. He wasn't looking at his daughter, Lara, clutching her flowers with a quiet pride. He was looking at the exit, calculating how soon he could leave once the names were read and the applause died down. "How long is this going to take?" he muttered, mostly to himself, but loud enough for those near him to hear. Tom caught the words, but didn't react. He was used to being invisible now. Children fidgeted in their seats. Grandparents leaned on canes and walkers. Balloons bobbed lazily above the crowd, tethered to chairs by trembling hands. Tom's eyes scanned the gathering, searching for a familiar face. Lisa, Jacob's mother, couldn't come. A double shift at the diner pulling her away again. She had worked there since she was 16, apron still crisp after all these years, hands calloused from carrying too much and sleeping too little. She had raised Jacob on late nights and early mornings, the quiet, steady kind of love that never made headlines, but built men like skyscrapers, men like Jacob. Just as it had been at Jacob's little league games, his scout ceremonies, the father-son picnics after Martin was gone. Tom's only son, lost to a rain-slick highway 5 years back. Martin had been the kind of man who laughed first and spoke last, who coached Jacob's teams even when work ran late and cheered the loudest, even when the scoreboard didn't agree. His absence had left a hollow that no ceremony could fill. The ache in his knee throbbed steadily, a reminder of other days, other fields. He shifted again, careful not to draw attention. Brad pulled out his phone, thumbing through messages with a scowl. A new deadline, another request, another pile of work waiting to drown him. "Stay close, Lara," he snapped again, voice rough with a tension she didn't deserve. Lara obeyed without a word, but her eyes, wide, patient, caught Tom's for a moment. A fleeting spark of something he recognized. Understanding. Respect. Then she looked away, drawn back by her father's heavy presence. The principal took the podium. The crowd shuffled into uneasy silence. Tom squared his shoulders, standing taller than he felt, the cane grounding him against the polished floor. He was ready to watch Jacob walk across that stage, ready to see him take a step that Tom himself had never been allowed to dream of. Not after enlisting, not after deployments, not after years spent building a life in the shadows of duty. He could almost hear Jacob's voice, young and earnest, polishing his medals years ago. "Someday, Grandpa, I'll make you proud." Tom smiled faintly. "You already have, kid." Tom's fingers brushed the medals on his jacket, the edges worn smooth, the colors faded but proud. He could still remember the weight of the uniform, the press of the desert heat during those long, endless days. A memory flashed into his mind. The desert stretched wide and endless, a landscape of pale dust and unyielding sun. Operation Desert Shield, 1990. Before the bombs, before the headlines, there was preparation. Tom, younger then, his back straighter, his knee still whole, barked orders over the roar of jet engines and rattling transports. His voice was firm but steady, a quiet authority that earned grudging respect. The younger airmen cursed under their breath, cursed the endless drills, the extra hours, the attention to every overlooked detail. But later, after the skies filled with fire and the ground shook under the weight of history, many of them would realize what Tom had given them. A chance to come home. He hadn't led them into battle. He made sure they were ready to survive it. Back in the crowded hall, Tom shifted, the old ache settling deeper into his knee. The crowd was restless now, chatter rising again as the principal droned on about the significance of the day. Parents fidgeted, scrolling their phones or adjusting their cameras. Brad Peterson was one of them, eyes darting from screen to screen, searching for any escape from the slow march of ceremony. He muttered something, another sharp whisper to no one in particular, and Lara shrank slightly, her small bouquet clutched tighter against her chest. Tom noticed, but he said nothing. He tilted his head, catching sight of Jacob among the sea of graduates, the cap slightly askew, the gown just a touch too large. Tom smiled softly, pride warming the edges of the loneliness. Jacob had been a boy once, sitting on Tom's knee, tracing the medals pinned neatly on his chest. "Did you win these, Grandpa?" "No, kid," Tom had said. "I earned them. Winning's got nothing to do with it." Lisa's face flickered in his memory too. Younger, less worn, laughing as she tried to corral Jacob at his kindergarten graduation. Martin's hand on her shoulder, the two of them smiling wide, never imagining a future where only half of that picture would remain. Tom shifted again, brushing a hand along the cane's worn handle. He was the last one standing now. And he would stand, as long as it took. The principal's voice lifted, announcing the start of the procession. The graduates stirred, chairs scraping softly against the polished floor. Tom straightened, a small breath drawn deep into his chest. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it, the quiet reckoning no one else yet saw coming. The air in the auditorium shifted, a collective breath drawn as the graduates began their slow procession toward the stage. Families leaned forward, phones held high, names ready on their tongues. Tom adjusted his stance, planting the cane firmly as he eased closer to the center aisle for a better view. Each step was careful, deliberate, the knee sending muted warnings through his frame. He waited, letting a wave of parents shuffle past. No rush, no demands. just the quiet dignity of a man who knew the value of patience. Brad Peterson wasn't patient. He checked his watch again, teeth grinding as the seconds dragged. He could feel the caffeine crackling under his skin, sharpening his edges, wearing his nerves thin. He shifted his weight from one foot to another, then back again. The line of parents slowed, clogged near the aisle. Brad sighed, loud, frustrated. "Come on," he muttered. His hand squeezed the coffee cup so tightly the lid creaked. Without thinking, or maybe just without caring, he moved forward, pushing through the thinning crowd. That's when it happened. Tom, focused on the stage, never saw him coming. Brad's shoulder caught Tom squarely, a careless shove that sent the older man stumbling. "Out of the way, old man," Brad barked, voice cutting through the hum of ceremony sharper than he realized. Tom's cane skidded, the sudden jolt sending a shock of pain up his leg, awakening the old injury with a vengeance. He staggered, the knee buckling for a terrifying second. The world tilted, the polished floor slick under his worn shoes. But somehow, through sheer will, Tom caught himself before falling. Gasps fluttered from a few nearby onlookers, a ripple of discomfort that quickly died into awkward silence. No one moved to help. Brad didn't even look back. He was already merging into the crowd again, his face taut, his focus somewhere far beyond the walls of the auditorium. Tom steadied himself, teeth clenched against the growing burn in his knee. He drew a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the cane's worn grip. One more minute, he told himself. One more hour. Across the room, Lara Peterson watched it all, her small face tight with something like shame. But she said nothing. She only clutched her bouquet tighter, the flowers trembling slightly under her small hands. Tom caught her eyes, just for a moment, a flicker of something soft, almost apologetic passing between them. Then the moment was gone, swallowed by the rustling of programs and the rising sound of the principal's voice echoing through the hall. "Graduates, please rise." Tom shifted again, pressing most of his weight to the cane, feeling the muscles in his leg tremble from the strain. The pain was worse now, sharper, angrier. It settled deep into the bone. An old enemy returned. But he didn't falter. He wouldn't. Not yet. The graduates filed neatly into their seats, a patchwork of caps and gowns shifting under the soft glare of the lights. Names began to echo through the auditorium, each one greeted with cheers and flashes of cameras. The ceremony had begun in earnest. Tom stayed where he was, standing, his frame stiff but unyielding. He dared not sit. He knew if he lowered himself now, he might not be able to rise again when Jacob's name was called. The cane bore his weight, and he bore the rest, quietly, without complaint. Brad Peterson exhaled heavily, checked his watch again, then the exit, calculating his odds of slipping out early. He shifted, muttering under his breath, irritated by the slow pace, the drawn-out speeches, the clumsy procession of graduates. Another sigh, sharper, louder. His daughter tugged gently at his sleeve, as if to ground him, but Brad shook her off with a terse grunt, his eyes already back on the door. Across the room, a different kind of focus settled. 6 figures, scattered among the families, unnoticed until now, had stilled. Older, grayer, quieter. Civilian clothes draped over frames too familiar with uniformity. Eyes sharp, posture straight, their movements minimal. They had seen the stumble. They had seen the casual cruelty, the way Tom had steadied himself, the way the world had moved on without a second glance. And they had recognized him. Not just the medals, not just the careful dignity in how he stood. They recognized the man, Thomas Wilson, the one who had barked orders and stayed late, long after others had folded in exhaustion. The one who had made sure they knew how to survive before they ever saw combat. The one who had made them hate him a little, then realize, years later, that he had saved their lives before the first shot was ever fired. Tom shifted his weight again, the cane pressing deep into the polished floor. His jaw tightened against the throbbing in his knee. Across the sea of faces, he spotted Jacob. So close now, just rose from the stage. The boy was adjusting his cap, straightening his gown with a nervous grin. Tom's heart swelled with a quiet pride that needed no audience. Brad shifted again, loudly. The noise drew a glance from Lara, who said nothing, only watched her father with wide, steady eyes. She clutched her flowers a little tighter, her gaze flickering once, briefly, to the old man still standing, still waiting. From their scattered positions, the 6 veterans exchanged a glance. No words, no signal, just a shared understanding. The kind forged not by command, but by service. They settled back into their seats, but their attention never wavered from Tom. A silent watch, a slow gathering storm waiting for its moment. Names continued to roll off the announcer's tongue, each syllable met with dutiful applause or enthusiastic cheers from proud families. Tom remained standing. The ache in his knee had become a burn, sharp, angry, insistent. Every shift of his weight sent a ripple of pain through his frame, but he masked it well, the old soldier's habit of bearing what couldn't be seen. He gripped the cane tighter. Jacob was only a few names away now. He just had to hold on a little longer. Brad Peterson leaned heavier against his chair, sighing again, louder this time. His foot tapped impatiently against the floor, a staccato beat of growing frustration. "Can they move any slower?" he muttered under his breath. A few heads turned. Disapproving glances tossed his way, but Brad didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. Lara shifted beside him, shrinking a little, her bouquet cradled against her chest like a shield. She kept sneaking glances toward the old man still standing at the fringe of the crowd, watching, waiting, invisible to most, but not to her. On the stage, a few more graduates shuffled across. Tom shifted his weight again, but the knee refused to cooperate. The burn turned into a dull roar, muscles trembling under the strain. He inhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, willing himself to stay upright. One more name, he thought. Just one more. The 6 veterans sat scattered, eyes trained forward, outwardly calm. But their hands were still, resting lightly on thighs or clasped together. Posture straight, shoulders squared, ready, waiting. They could feel it, the old current that once moved through them in the field. A silent cue. A moment of knowing. No words spoken. No orders needed. Brad shifted again, pulling his phone from his pocket, scrolling mindlessly. Another email. Another fire waiting to be put out when this ceremony finally ended. "Hurry it up," he muttered, unaware of the looks his bitterness drew now. He barely noticed Lara's hand tightening on the flowers, or the slight crease in her brow as she glanced once more toward the old man. Tom wobbled, a slight, almost imperceptible falter. The cane caught him. Barely. The pain flashed hotter, harsher, almost blinding. For a moment the world narrowed, the chatter, the applause, the lights, all fading into the background. Just him, just Jacob, almost there. Jacob Wilson. The name echoed through the hall. Tom shifted forward, slowly, carefully, lifting the cane, preparing to take a step. But his knee betrayed him. The joint locked, stiff and unforgiving, and the old soldier stumbled. Not as badly as before, but enough. Enough for those who had served to see it. Enough for them to move. The 6 veterans stood, quietly, deliberately. One by one, they rose from their scattered seats, forming a loose arc, eyes locked not on the stage, but on the man still struggling at the edge of the crowd. The air in the auditorium shifted. Families hushed. The buzz softened. Something, unseen but deeply felt, was beginning. Tom wavered again, the tremor traveling through his leg, into his hand gripping the cane. His breath caught, and for a moment it seemed as if he might not recover this time. But then, movement. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The 6 veterans stepped away from their scattered seats, weaving through the crowded rows with quiet purpose. No fanfare, no words. Just the rhythmic tap of shoes against polished floors and the steady cadence of men and women who knew the weight of the moment. Brad glanced up, annoyed at the disruption, but quickly fell silent as he watched the 6 figures converge. Around him, other families began to notice too. Conversations faded. Camera flashes stopped mid-spark. The veterans reached Tom, forming a loose half-circle in front of him, their presence a barrier and a shield all at once. Tom blinked in confusion, straightening as much as he could, instinctively pulling his shoulders back, standing taller despite the fire in his knee. One of the veterans, a woman, silver hair tucked neatly beneath a simple cap, stepped forward. Without a word, she lifted her hand in a slow, deliberate salute. Tom hesitated, startled by the gesture, but slowly, carefully, his hand rose, trembling slightly as he returned the salute with the precision only years of service could engrave. One by one, the others followed. 6 salutes. 6 silent acknowledgments of a man who had never asked for it, who had never sought it, who had served and stepped aside when his time was done. The crowd was utterly still. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the restless shuffling of chairs ceased as the full gravity of the moment pressed down on the hall. Children watched with wide eyes. Parents lowered their phones. Graduates paused in their seats. Brad stood frozen, his hand still half lifted toward his phone. He glanced at Lara, who was no longer looking at the stage. She was watching the old man, the veterans, the silent ceremony unfolding, her eyes wide, her small face serious. She tugged lightly at her father's sleeve. When he looked down, she spoke, her voice soft, but carrying more weight than any of the applause that had come before. "I will always stand for you when you grow old, Dad." Brad's throat tightened. The phone slipped lower in his hand, forgotten. For the first time in what felt like years, he looked, really looked, not just at the old man, but at what he represented. A lifetime of service, a lifetime of sacrifice, a dignity that didn't demand respect, but inspired it. Tom's salute lowered slowly, the ceremony complete. The veterans stepped back, heads nodding slightly in quiet reverence, then turned and resumed their places without a sound. No applause, no clapping, just the thick, weighty silence of true respect. Jacob, standing proudly on the stage, his diploma clutched tight in one hand, caught the last movement of the salute. He lifted his free hand, not waving, but saluting back, crisp, sure, proud. Tom saw it, and he smiled. A small, weary smile, but one filled with a lifetime's worth of pride. The tension in Tom's knee throbbed with every heartbeat, but he stood firm, a quiet figure anchored in the wake of the unexpected honor. Around him, the crowd remained hushed, the silence heavier than applause could ever have been. No one told them to be silent. Respect simply settled over them, an invisible mantle, shared and understood. Brad lowered his phone completely, sliding it absently into his jacket pocket. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, at the quiet strength in her young face, the way she carried herself, the way she understood something he had forgotten. Respect, dignity, patience. The words she had whispered to him. "I will always stand for you when you grow old, Dad," echoed louder than the principal's amplified voice. Brad swallowed against the tightness in his throat. Somewhere in the blur of work, bills, and deadlines, he had lost sight of what really mattered. He hadn't meant to become bitter, impatient, dismissive, but life had a way of sanding down even the best intentions. It took a stranger's silent suffering to remind him. It took his daughter's quiet voice to wake him. On the stage, Jacob's smile hadn't faltered. His hand, still held in salute, lowered slowly. He tucked his diploma under one arm and raised his gaze, searching through the crowd until his eyes found Tom. And then, he smiled wider. Not the hurried grin of a young man eager to escape the ceremony, but a slow, meaningful smile that carried a silent message. "I see you. I know what you gave." Tom shifted slightly, the pain a constant hum, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. This was worth every ache, every unseen scar, every forgotten battle. He straightened his jacket, his hand brushing once more over the medals pinned there. They didn't shine as brightly as they once had, but that didn't matter. They had done their work. Brad reached for Lara's hand. She didn't pull away. Her small fingers curled into his. anchoring him more securely than any obligation or deadline ever could. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and for the first time in a long time, Brad Peterson allowed himself to simply be present, to stand, to watch, to remember. Tom turned slowly, careful on his bad leg, and began the long, deliberate walk back to the seat he had never been offered. The 6 veterans remained where they were, heads high, shoulders straight. Silent sentries for a man who deserved far more than a ceremony could ever offer. As Tom passed by, a few people nodded, slight, respectful gestures. A few lowered their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of a debt they could never fully understand. And Brad, he stood straighter too, no longer shifting, no longer impatient. No words passed his lips, just a small nod, subtle but sincere. Tom caught it, a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes, but he said nothing. He only continued on, steady, sure. The ceremony continued, names called, diplomas handed out, cheers rising again. But something had changed. Not the ceremony, not the world, just the hearts of a few who had needed the reminder. As Tom settled slowly into the folding chair, the protest of his knee sharp but bearable, his hand once again brushed across the medals pinned to his chest. The fabric was worn thin beneath his fingertips, the places his hand always landed first, muscle memory carved from years of silent ritual. His gaze drifted from the bustling hall, back to a quieter place, a quieter time, a small living room, dimly lit by the late afternoon sun filtering through faded curtains, the gentle clink of metal against metal. Young Jacob sat cross-legged on the carpet, tiny hands clumsy but eager, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth in concentration as he polished the bronze star with a soft cloth. Tom sat in his favorite chair, the one with the worn armrests and the slight lean to one side, watching the boy with a quiet pride that never needed words. "Did you win these, Grandpa?" Jacob had asked, looking up, eyes wide with the innocence only children possess. Tom smiled, a small, patient smile, and shook his head. "No, kid," he said, voice low and even. "You don't win things like this." Jacob frowned slightly, confused. "Then why do you have them?" Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands loose between them. A soldier's stance, even in civilian life. "These," he said, tapping the medal gently, "are earned. Not for being the strongest or the fastest, not even for being the bravest." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're earned for standing up when it's hard, for doing your duty when nobody's watching, for carrying something heavier than pride." Jacob nodded slowly, the solemnity settling on him in that way it sometimes does with children, deeply and without pretense. He turned back to the medals, polishing them with a new reverence. Tom leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet fill the space between them. Some lessons didn't need repeating. Tom's eyes blinked back into focus. The auditorium lights glinted off the medals, dulled with age, but no less heavy with meaning. On the stage, Jacob's name had been called, his diploma earned. In the crowd, 6 veterans sat taller, silent sentries to a man who had once prepared them to carry their own burdens. And somewhere nearby, a man who had once shoved past without a second glance now stood straighter, his daughter's hand anchoring him to the ground he had forgotten how to stand on. Tom let a breath out slowly, the ache in his knee forgotten, at least for now. This moment was enough. He had carried his burden quietly for years. Today, others had carried it with him, if only for a moment, and that was enough. The ceremony wound toward its conclusion. Names called, diplomas handed over, proud smiles frozen in time by camera flashes. But Tom Wilson sat quietly at the edge of it all, unseen by most, yet seen by those who mattered. He sat straighter now, the pain in his knee a dull hum, the weight of years lighter somehow. Jacob's diploma gleamed in the boy's hand as he walked off the stage, searching the crowd, his eyes finally finding Tom's. Their gazes locked, no words exchanged, just a small, knowing nod, the kind shared between men bound by more than blood. the kind shared between generations who understood what it meant to carry something heavier than pride. Brad stood too, a little behind his daughter, no longer glancing at his phone, no longer checking the time. He stood still, really still, for the first time in what felt like months, letting the gravity of the moment settle around him. Lara leaned lightly against his side, still holding her flowers, her small hand wrapped around his. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some things are taught in silence. Some lessons are passed not in words, but in the quiet dignity of standing still. Some burdens are carried without applause. Some lessons are taught without words. Real service leaves no fanfare, only lives better lived because of it. The loudest honor is the quiet one, the unseen sacrifice, the steady hand, the life spent lifting others up without ever asking to be lifted in return. We don't salute the uniform because it shines. We salute it because of the wear, the weight, the stories it can't tell. Today we remembered. Tom exhaled slowly, his gaze lingering a moment longer on the spot where Jacob had stood, before he rose. Cain planted firm, shoulders set. The world might not have noticed him walking out of that hall, but a few hearts did, and that was enough. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from. Comment below to honor someone in your life. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.